Look at that. That's how you know your transom's rotten, when you got plants growing out of it. Hey, Tom from Tom's Toons. Today we are tackling the transom on this 1988 Tracker Bass Buggy. This thing is rotten. We're going to show you how to replace that affordably and hopefully simply if you've got the same thing going on your boat. I just took the transom saver off of that, and I don't even know if I should have climbed underneath there. That's in pretty rough shape. What I need to do first to replace this transom board, what it is typically is 2 pieces of ply, so 7-layer ply sandwiched together, glued and screwed, and then we bolt it back into the framework of the transom. Listen, I know you're going to comment and you're going to say you should use plastic or Kusa board, you should use all aluminum. This has lasted 30 years basically, just like this. 35 years, right? We're going to do the same thing they did from the factory. It's going to last another 30 years. So I'm confident in the way that they designed these, and I'm confident in the way that I'm going to structure this, that this is going to last essentially forever. Forever is not 30 years, but you know what I'm saying. I have an engine hoist. I know at home you might not have an engine hoist. You might have to get creative with a chain fall or some sort of system. Maybe you've got a bucket tractor. Maybe you got a friend who's got an engine hoist. But this can be done relatively quickly. So if you need to borrow a friend's engine hoist or take it to a friend's house, that can be done. I'm going to take the hood off. There's a lift ring on here, and we're going to go ahead and get all the weight off of the transom so I can unbolt the motor and then get at the transom board itself. I am going to leave the motor tilted just a little bit, and that's going to help with the angle of the transom and everything when I go to bolt it back on. Most of your motors, especially the American motors, Evinrude, Johnson, Mercury, a lot of them are going to be held on by 3/4 inch nut and bolt. This might be 17 millimeter with a 19 millimeter head because it's a Tohatsu if they use the Tohatsu hardware. So just a heads up on that. Indeed it is 17 millimeter. My 4 bolts are out. I'm gonna go ahead and lift this up, and then I gotta swing it out of the way so I can get at the transom. Just to give you an idea of how rotten this is, that's the surface on the outside. On the inside, we've got where the hardware was. It had huge washers. They're all sunk in. This wood here is just completely gone. This bolt's not holding anything. This top piece is just cosmetic. It's just a thin aluminum. It protects the edge of the board from water penetrating and whatnot, but it's mostly cosmetic. So we're gonna have to bend that back a little bit so that everything can fit in. But what I'm gonna do is pull this trim off, and then I gotta get in at these bolts. We'll replace these carriage bolts with stainless hardware, new bolts, and that'll hold everything that we're making in nice and snug. Look at that. That's how you know your transom's rotten, when you got plants growing out of it. I don't know if you just saw that fall out, but there's some of our transom board just crumbling. And if you look in here, that's pretty structural piece, that top corner. That's just rotted right out on both sides. We're gonna go ahead, get that all fixed up. Usually I gotta fight these things to come out, but this one's so rotten that it's gonna literally just slide right out. That's what we're dealing with. No bueno when you're hanging your newer 4-stroke 50 horse on something like this. So what I've got with this, if you catch this and you do this earlier than the rot has set in, which I highly recommend, you can just drop this on a new piece of plywood and you can stencil it right out. So we're gonna be able to do that to an extent, but I'm gonna have to make some new lines coming off the top and the side to make a corner here. So let's go to where we're gonna be doing the woodworking side of this and get our plywood ready. I'm gonna cut myself 2 pieces of this that are square, that are pretty much exactly the same, and do my best. I've got a nice clean corner here, and I'm gonna cut a nice clean corner from over there. That way I can line up these corners, glue them together, screw them together, and then we can move on from there to actually cutting the shape out once I've got them glued and screwed together. This is marine grade treated plywood. So it is green plywood. In freshwater conditions, I've said this in a bunch of videos, I've never seen this cause a problem with corrosion. That was green wood also that was in there, and there's no noticeable corrosion on the aluminum where it was sandwiched together. That's my take on freshwater and green wood, or CCA treated, pressure treated on aluminum. Maybe in saltwater you're gonna expedite the process of corrosion, but I don't deal with that, so I can't comment on it. But this stuff works great. This is a 7-layer ply, and when we glue it together, we get 14 layers. The cool part about that versus using a solid board, if one little void happens to give, you've got 13 other layers of ply that are glued together and held together to make this kind of like a network of strength. That's why Tracker used this style originally, and that's why we're gonna do the same thing. Got my two boards matched up here. I'll match up, this is my cut edge, so I'll match up that factory edge on both of them to make it nice and square. What I'm using is an exterior grade waterproof wood glue. It's worked great. I've used construction adhesive in the past. The problem is that stuff doesn't squish as well, so you end up with kind of like a, I mean, still good strength, but you end up with a little bit of a void between the two layers of ply. This lets that plywood sink right plywood to plywood, does a better job of getting a nice snug fit up. In the words of Benny D, if a little bit's good, more is better. I've got this side and this side lined up really well, not so worried about that. That's my not factory side. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clamp this together, and then I can get some screws in. I'm gonna take that nasty old piece, line it up on the top edge here. So I'm using my factory edge as my guide. There's another plant growing here. That's literally a root system of a plant that was growing in this transom. Let's get rid of that. Some moss too. So with my top edge lined up nice and smooth, I'm gonna go ahead and trace in what I can. Like I said, I'm gonna have to make a new corner up here. That's okay. This side has the corner. So I'm just gonna continue that line up to the top corner to recreate what was rotten. Now with my shape in here, I'm gonna go ahead and put screws in where I know I'm not gonna have a bolt hole or my holes that go to hold everything in. That's just gonna help secure it while I cut out my shape. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a couple screws in the bottom corners, a couple up in the top, and then usually I just do one dead center. And these are 1-inch stainless, gotta go stainless here. Stainless screws, they're gonna countersink right in there nicely and hold these boards together. These are 1-inchers. We're going in through 3/4 inch plywood, and I'm gonna go ahead and sink it on in there. This is ready now to cut. I always cut on the outside. I'm gonna make this a little bigger than I need to, because my thought is that old wood probably shrunk up a little bit over time, or the edges have at least rotted away to where it's a little smaller. So I'm gonna cut on the outside of this line all the way around and make sure that this is a nice snug fit, and when I run bolts through it, I have a nice grab. There's my new transom board. I'm gonna go see how this fits, and hopefully we'll just be tapping it down into place, making sure everything's square across, and then we can drill the new holes. We got a great fit. So we're touching on the outside corners. I'm just gonna use the transom as my kind of straight edge to make sure we're lined up. I like that a lot. This transom, the way this is designed, has a little gap on the other side here. So there's probably about about 1/8 of an inch going across. So what we can do in this case, we could just bolt this together, and I think it'd be plenty strong. But what I'm gonna do is I've got some aluminum sheeting, some scrap, and I'm just gonna cut one more piece to mirror this, and we're gonna add one more layer of protection. We're gonna put aluminum in there to just reinforce everything. I'm lining up that nice clean edge with the clean edge of the sheared edge of the aluminum. We'll trace it on there. And in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and cut right on the line, essentially, to make this shape. If you've watched my boat building videos, you know that this is how I cut my aluminum sheeting. I set my blade really, really shallow, just to about 1/8 of an inch, maybe just past. And that makes a nice clean cut. My saw doesn't grab, it's a lot safer. That fits up really nice. So from here, I'm gonna go ahead, I need to drill in just a few screws to hold this together, especially in the middle. We'll do one in the middle, and then probably the same thing we did before to go ahead, and I'm just gonna cover up these screw holes where I ran those stainless in. I'm gonna run stainless pan head screws to hold this in. That is ready to go in. Let's go fit it up. And slide this down in, and that 1/8 inch aluminum ate up a little more space. So now when I tighten it, I'm more confident the fit's gonna be really nice. So we get to where we're level across on each side. And then remember, we've got to get this cap back on here too. So I've got that bent back over to cover the top edge of that plywood. I'm just going to go ahead, get it in place, and run those stainless screws back in. They were in good shape, so we'll just reuse those. Got that fastened on. Had to use self-tappers on the aluminum side. That looks pretty darn good. We're gonna go ahead and run new holes, new hardware, a bolt with a washer, and a lock nut, a nylock nut on each side. Our transom board is fully installed now. I'm ready to rehang the motor. The way I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna swing the motor back around. It was just resting on the transom, super common on pontoon boats. They didn't have any complaints about how it was running, or at least they didn't voice that to me. So I'm gonna put it back on right how it was. Remember, if you are trying to maximize performance, a good place to start is when you look at your ventilation plate, the plate just above the propeller, in relation to your scum line, which you can see right here. I'm going to start by putting that ventilation plate, some people might call it a cavitation plate, it's the plate above the prop, 4 inches below that scum line. That way when the boat lifts up and that water line is going to move down a little bit, then my water flow is still getting to my propeller. If I go too high and the boat lifts, I'm more likely to ventilate or catch air to the propeller. We don't want that. So we'll drop it 4 inches down. That way when the boat lifts, we still get proper water flow to the propeller. So I'm going to use the hoist, get this back on here resting, and then we'll measure side to side, clamp it, and then I'm going to re-drill the holes just using the motor mounting bracket. I'm not going to template this one. I'm just going to use the motor since it's resting right on there. This is where keeping that motor trimmed just right allows you to get everything seated up nice and snug. There's no gap there now. So I'm gonna grab a couple clamps. We'll clamp this, we'll measure a few times to make sure we're square on both sides, and then we'll drill and bolt. What I'm measuring is probably gonna be different than yours. So I just have 8 inches from here to this piece of aluminum. That's what we're going with on each side. Looks like it's gonna line us up really nice. With it clamped, I'm gonna run a 1/2 inch drill bit right through that top hole. That way, if they ever wanted to adjust it, they could go up. I don't wanna drill the bottom hole because then I can never go up with it. So I'm gonna drill that top hole, and then we'll do the same on the other side. We'll drill the same 1/2 inch towards the bottom, and we'll do it in the top of this slot. It's slotted here. We'll do it towards the top, and that'll allow it to go up if it ever needs to. I got my bolt on the other side, so I'm just gonna push this in tight and drill this hole. We're going at a slight upward angle to match the angle of the transom. This is what was on there, this whole smorgasbord of washers and whatnot. We're just gonna go back to the stock washers. Also, it's not a bad idea to have a big backing plate, maybe a square of aluminum or something. But since I have aluminum sheet on the inside, I can run this right to the aluminum. Everything's gonna be really reinforced. I always use my impact to get things snug, and I like to hand tighten to finish really snug. That way I know everything's really tight. Let's get my tools cleaned up, lower it down, and get the hood back on, and this is a wrap. That's a wrap. Let's look in at the new transom, see what we did, and then get one last look at this old rotten transom. That's what we removed. And here's our new board. Marine grade treated, and we went the extra step, and there's aluminum sheeting on the inside. It's just one of those things. If you're working on your pontoon boat, you're restoring everything, just plan on replacing this so you have the peace of mind that you did the right thing for your transom and your motor too. You can buy the glued plywood just like we use today. You can buy it pre-glued, ready to go from pontoonstuff.com. Use Tom's Toons at checkout to save 5% on anything you order there. And anything else you need for your project, you're gonna find there too. Please subscribe, check out pontoonstuff.com and BRUNT Workwear, like the socks too. They make awesome boots, great products for projects like this, or for me working every day in the shop. We have a discount code in the description for BRUNT Workwear as well. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and comment. Let us know if this is something you need to do or you recently did on your own boat.